Breaking news for XRP investors. Ripple CEO Brad Garlinghouse was speaking live at DC's Fintech Week, describing a very optimistic vision for the future. This event was sponsored by companies like Amazon, Visa, Robinhood, and several other industry giants, talking about the shaping of the American economy and how the blockchain products that we discuss every day are going to be playing a pivotal role. Brad Garlinghouse also discussed how it's a new era for both Ripple and the XRP ledger. With all of the regulatory uncertainty behind us, there is nothing but bullish momentum sitting in front of us when it comes to the adoption of these digital assets. And we're going to start this episode off by drawing a correlation between the 2017 bull market and what we're going through today. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Good Evening Crypto, your favorite crypto news related channel. If you enjoy this content, smash that like button and subscribe, as it greatly helps us out and lets the YouTube algorithm know these guys, they might know what they're talking about. But we're going to start off today's episode with some pretty exciting correlations here, Johnny. And I talked about this a lot earlier in the week. The 2017 bull market had something very similar to what we witnessed on Saturday. The XRP cyclical structure is showing a striking similarity once again. After the major rally in 2017, the price was rejected from the 2013 all-time high and then retested the 2014 all-time high, which had previously acted as resistance on the XRP price chart. After accumulating strength in this area, it began its parabolic bull run. And I'll circle this for all of our listeners. You can tell both bullish waves came after this major correction. So this would tell me if we're at the same point, Johnny, we're not talking $10, $20 XRP. We could be talking $50, $100, $200 XRP. And that's not an opinion. That is what the data and analytics are telling us. Now, today, the picture is almost identical, according to this chart analyst. After the strong surge in 2024, the price was rejected at the 2017 all-time high. It then came down to retest the 2021 all-time high level at $1.90, which previously acted as resistance. Now, the power accumulation phase is ongoing in this region, and following this consolidation, the next parabolic run will be inevitable. Patience is the most important aspect of the crypto market right now. So with that being said, guys, we're going to get into this Brad Garlinghouse interview, showing our listeners how it's a classic example of show me the chart and I'll tell you the news. The chart looks extremely optimistic. We just liquidated all the leverage traders. We have the Clarity Act being worked on, ETFs on the horizon, Wall Street adopting digital assets, and most importantly, Ripple CEO Brad Garlinghouse working with the US government hand in hand to bring forth this new era of digital finance here in the USA. But if you're optimistic on XRP and you see this correlation, smash that like button. If you disagree, leave a comment underneath the video so we can debate that. But let's get right into this interview. This is Ripple CEO Brad Garlinghouse discussing innovation and the evolution of the XRP ledger here at DC Fintech Week 2025.
Look, I remain optimistic. The industry needs what Ripple has already achieved, which is clarity. And we had to get clarity through a $150 million lawsuit and a federal judge. But we think the whole industry should have that same clarity. And so we've been fighting for that and we'll continue to do so.
Look at the sponsors. Amazon Web Services, Visa, we have Robinhood, we have Ondo, we have Circle, we have Chainlink, we have Citibank, and of course, we have Ripple, all coming together to sponsor DC Fintech Week here in 2025. We can use this as an indicator of not only which traditional companies are most excited about engaging with digital assets. We can look and say, these 5 companies, Chainlink, Ondo, Circle, Ripple, these are the companies that are working directly with the US government and some of the largest blockchain issuers on the planet.
And you know, another thing to take away, if you think about this, right, this is fintech. So some of those names you expect to see them being there, like Visa and PayPal, right? But what you're actually seeing as you read some of those other ones, what do you notice? You're literally witnessing the merger of fintech, of the whole industry coming together, and fintech realizing, okay, there's cheaper, better ways to do it. And these are some of the players that are going to be here to do it. So now we'll be interesting to see in the long run which players survive and make it out through this. Like you said, rightfully, we're going into 96, 97. There were a lot of players that were going to be into internet. Pets.com was the biggest one, right? And it ended up blowing up and it went away. The question is, what do we see here? But it's so exciting to see these all come together. And these are early indicators of some of the big time players, or could be future Amazons of the world.
Well, so I think to some degree, the whole lawsuit for Ripple was about what is Ripple, which is a privately funded company that raised venture capital and issued stock associated with that. Those are securities. What is XRP, which is a technology, an open source technology that is kind of native to our products. We use XRP in our product stack, but there are scores of other companies building in and around the XRP ecosystem. people, will say things like, well, XRP has a CEO. And I'm like, who is it? Ripple has a CEO. That's me. There's scores, if not 100 other CEOs building around the XRP ecosystem. And I think that's when I hear people say that, I think, okay, they're not educated about what's going on. And so we need to educate people. Obviously, you see that in a number of other tokens where there's a very distributed, very open source community. People don't understand Ripple does not control XRP. It is open source. There have been amendments passed to the XRP open source technology that we opposed. We were against them and they still passed. That's okay. That's open source technology. There's other things we have championed that have passed, but it takes 80% of the community approving those amendments, which Ripple doesn't have control of that.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, if you were to define kind of what's a commodity versus a security, how would you do that?
Yeah, I'm going to do everything I can to dodge that question up here.
But I think he did just answer that question, Johnny Krypto. And I think what his defining factor is there a centralized mechanism controlling the network? And Ripple clearly is not doing that. There's a consensus mechanism. You need 80% voting. It's completely different than Ripple dictating exactly what games are played on the XRP ledger. And this is another primary example of how the XRP ledger has evolved. The XRP ledger in 2017, it may have been the same price for 25 minutes, but it is not the same blockchain protocol. Stablecoins, tokenized assets, even the EVM sidechain, those Ethereum developers being able to build and develop applications that are now applicable on the XRP ledger, all of that's just getting started here in 2025. And quite frankly, a lot of that has to do with Ripple, but it's not dictated by Ripple. If Ripple were to disappear tomorrow, the XRP ledger would still survive.
Correct. And that's exactly why we need the Clarity Act, Abs, or the courts are using what's called the Howey Act, and it has literally, it was started like 1940s, and here we are in the 2000s. And so the reality is we now need rules around what today's technology is, and exactly what he just said. These things aren't governed by companies, but yet we're trying to use a rule that does. Abs, with that said, let's pause right here because,
and I think that's the most exciting part. And I think that's the most exciting part about the crypto market right now is that a lot of these positive catalysts that we continue to repeat over and over again, they still haven't occurred. And Brad Garlinghouse just hinted at that here. If you're enjoying this content, guys, hit the like button, help us out in the YouTube algorithm. And most importantly, we're going to continue showing up for you guys every single day, twice a day here on the Good Evening Crypto channel.
I mean, look, there is language that has been proposed. I happen to think that there's parts of the Clarity Act and that passed the House that are quite constructive towards that clarity. I think some of the things that have been circulated, I'm like, okay, I don't actually get how that, well, look, for Ripple, the one thing we will be adamant and absolute about is whatever is, these draft comments that I see, it's like, well, we already won a court case by a federal judge. And if what you're writing gives the SEC an opportunity to bring another lawsuit against us, like, okay, wait, we can't support that. You can't take us back. And I think the industry needs what Ripple has already achieved. And what Ripple has done, and we've invested literally billions of dollars in the crypto industry broadly and tried to be a champion of the industry. We fought the SEC as a champion of the industry. And I think that we will continue to support it on a multi-chain basis. Those that I think approach it as there is somehow one token to rule them all, like that's not going to be the future of crypto and blockchain. In the same way, there wasn't one browser or one search engine or one auction website, or like, I'm thinking back to when I got involved in technology in the late 90s.
And that's something we've repeated here for a very long time on the Good Evening Crypto channel is that products like Chainlink and products like Ripple aren't even built to do the same thing. So there's not going to be a one chain take all situation. And people often will go back and reference the Elon Musk tweet where he said one coin to rule them all. And it was the Bitcoin ring. The more important part of that, guys, is it will not be one coin to rule them all. We will see a decentralized economy where people have assets on HBAR and people have assets on Stellar and people are leveraging Algorand. And there's people using smart contracts on AVAX, but there's also people using smart contracts on Ethereum. There's going to be banks tapping into the XRP ledger and there's going to be banks tapping into the Stellar network. That's how this game is going to play out. And every single industry executive, it's not just Ripple CEO, has told us that it's not going to be a one winner take all situation here. This is going to be a very diversified market after the Trump administration.
Actually, Abs, just to build on what you said, it's not even going to be individual silos like that. It's going to be these technologies merging together. You're going to have it's almost like, think of it like a layer of cakes. You have a layer, there'll be some technology at the bottom, right? And the base technology. And then there's a smart contract. Then there's an Oracle. Then there's something that allows them all to communicate together. There's going to be 4 or 5 different blockchains baked into one that's going to form the system. That's why this is so exciting. It's not even going to be one rules it all or one is the main takes the cake. No, it's going to be 5, 6 of them married together. And that's one system. And then someone's going to build another 4 or 5 baked together. Then we're going to see which ones win. So that's how this game's going to play out in the end.
So mergers and acquisitions. I wanted to ask, because Ripple has a number of examples of companies that they have acquired in the stablecoin realm, in the sort of infrastructure realm. What is sort of the plan here? What's the thought process? What's the end goal?
You know, partly because of the shift, I think people still underestimate the U.S. as the largest economy in the world went from very strong headwinds to pretty strong tailwinds. Now we're still figuring out as an industry, what do those tailwinds mean in the United States? And again, having the chief legal officer from Citibank, you know, is an example of that shift. And I think he even talked about how it was very, very hard for them to engage this industry. This has been publicly reported, but I personally was debanked by Citibank during the last 4 years. And I think, you know, happily we're past that stage, but I still think people underestimate the shift in those headwinds and tailwinds. And Ripple's thesis has been, okay, now is a time to really be aggressive about growth. And that is both organic growth and continuing to build. We're in the payments business, leveraging core technologies around blockchain and the XRP ledger around payments. We're in the custody business. We're in the stablecoin business. And then earlier this year, to your point around mergers and acquisitions, we spent $1.25 billion to buy Hidden Road, a prime broker, frankly, the largest non-bank prime broker out there. And we bought for $200 million, a stablecoin company called Rail, which was one of the leading stablecoin companies for the enterprise. So corporate treasury looking to use stablecoins to solve some of their internal movement of money. And that has been a great acquisition for us. So we're going to continue to play offense. I hope I have some more news on that very, very soon. And we think now is the time to invest. And, you know, that partly because of that macro shift in government policy for the United States. One of the things I would ask everyone to do, both reporters and otherwise, is to hold traditional finance accountable for, yes, I agree, the crypto industry should be held to the same standard around AML, KYC, OFAC compliance. Yes, yes, yes. And we should have the same access to infrastructure like a Fed master account. You can't say one and then combat the other. Like that's disingenuous, and it's hypocritical, and I think we all should call them out for being anti-competitive in that regard. So that's kind of one thought of just there should be a level playing field, and to the extent we're seeing people act in different ways. Now the other part I would say, as much as a lot of the Fed managed by this administration, the federal government, not the Fed. As much as that shift has changed, I think some banks are still nervous until those changes are codified into law. The Genius Act obviously helped, and that unlocks, I think, I had meetings yesterday in New York City where banks that would not have talked to us 3 years ago are now leaning in and saying, how can we partner around this?
Citibank, Bank of America, JP Morgan, the largest financial companies on the planet are now meeting with Brad Garlinghouse behind the scenes to work on the evolution of this technology. But the most important part of that short clip was that banks, large companies are still on the sidelines. And his whole speech there was talking about how when the Clarity Act is passed inside the United States, all of those large financial companies, including Bank of America, JP Morgan, Citibank, all these pillars of the American economy, they are now going to begin using products like the XRP ledger. Make no mistake about it.
Again, Ripple has had we fought the fight and we have clarity that XRP is not a security, but the industry doesn't have that, which I think creates challenges for some of the more conservative banking infrastructure, even though they're like, yeah, okay, we're interested, but are they really leaning in because they're worried that in 3 years from now, there's another election, and is there a shift? I think that's a little bit too cautionary, because I think every day that goes by even if without the Clarity Act in place, there's more and more firm policy positions that agencies are taking.
Mm-hmm. And so you think that even though there might be some sort of regulatory shift with the next administration, whoever they are, you're not going to go back to where we were at with Gary Gensler?
I definitely don't think that was. Frankly, I think that was a dark day for technology in the United States, and they were not acting with good intent. And I could spend a whole half an hour session just on that. And I mean, look, you had a federal judge. This is a quote. A federal judge said about the Gensler SEC, "They are not following a faithful allegiance to the law." Yeah, that's pretty damning for a federal judge who happened to be appointed by Obama. That they would come out and say that about a Biden SEC. I don't think we will go back to that. And frankly, I think the ship has sailed. I think that you can't put the genie back in the bottle in the United States. I don't think you really could, even though Biden may have tried with Gensler. But I think now that we are where we are, we are seeing many banks lean in. But for years, the U.S. was a frozen market. I mean, one quick data point is 80% of Ripple's hiring between 2001 and 2004 was non-US, because that's where our customers were. Our customers around the world were leaning in. The customers in the US were, we gotta be careful.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of banks, I mean, Ripple has applied for a national bank charter.
Yes.
Can you just sort of give a brief overview, any updates in that process? How are things going there?
I don't know the exact answer. I mean, look, I think it depends who you talk to. It's been a little disappointing to see some of the traditional banks start to lobby against things like that. It's like, look, if we want more stability, we want clear regulation, having a Fed master account actually is a net plus to that. You want to de-risk stablecoins, having Circle have a Fed master account, have Ripple have a Fed master account, that's actually a good thing. And held to the same regulatory standards as a bank. Great, we're in. We feel like we're already doing that. Ripple launched our stablecoin under a New York Trust license, which we feel like is the gold standard above what even others have done, because we are all about serving institutional money movement. And institutions aren't going to work with us unless we have really leaned into being compliance first.
Mm-hmm. And I know there have been some concerns raised from community banks who say, look, if you give, Ripple and others a bank charter or master account, we're concerned that you're already going to see funding. Trillions, I think, are projected to go from some of these smaller banks into crypto. There's a concern about a lack of capital. How do you respond to that?
There's nothing that stops community banks from leaning into these new technologies also. This is kind of the classic, people are afraid of innovation and the innovator's dilemma. And we shouldn't penalize consumers based upon, it may be a particular community bank's unwillingness to lean into new technologies. That doesn't make sense to me. Like we should want community banks. If anything, it should be, how do we provide clarity such that community banks can be served and leverage these technologies and compete with Citibank? That's a good thing. Right now, the community bank has to pay Citibank. I shouldn't pick on Citi. I like Brent a lot, actually, but let's say HSBC. They're not represented here. But the big correspondent banks are making money from the community banks by actually being their correspondent bank to settle cross-border transactions.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering too, kind of dipping back into market structure here for a second. I mean, if the Senate doesn't get stuck on market structure, you've said that you've already seen this increased interest in things like stablecoin in the markets. I mean, does that kind of put a freeze on things if there's no regulatory clarity coming from Congress this year and no certainty? Is that going to make it that much harder for a lot of the digital asset space to gain traction with companies, gain traction with banks?
So I think you asked the question in kind of a black versus white, and I think about it as gray. It depends upon the bank. It depends upon what people like Paul Atkins say publicly and put out as position papers on behalf of the SEC or CFTC. And I think it's kind of to be determined. But the more time that goes by, the better I think it is for the industry, period. Again, Ripple happens to be in a unique position, and that we fought a multi-year battle to get that clarity for XRP. And so that the number of people building in and around the XRP ecosystem grew quickly after that resolution was final, because okay, this is now clear. I think the whole industry needs that. The whole industry needs to be able to lean in and build whether you're building payment solutions, custody solutions, land title registry solutions, tokenizing commercial real estate, like this tsunami is still coming. And I don't think there's anything that the US federal government is going to do to stop that. Leaning in to provide clarity so that consumers are protected, companies know how to operate. The vast majority of entrepreneurs I know in crypto want to play by the rules. They're asking to understand what the rules are.
Sure. But is there, because I hear this on the Hill a lot too, that if they don't provide more of this framework, if they don't provide more, whoever named the clarity bill was really smart because it just keeps coming up naturally. Whoever provides more clarity, then crypto will go overseas, kind of as you mentioned, that the US will miss the boat, and that, even if we're still having things like, Paul Atkins coming up with stuff, or the SEC regulating on things, or coming out with more clarity, that will not be enough.
Well, the one thing I want to say, your comment is that already has happened, right? Lots of entrepreneurs have decided, I'm not going to incorporate the United States because there's not clear rules. I mean, people can debate about MiCA, which is the Europe's kind of Clarity Act version, and it provides guidance. The FSA in the UK, like there are clearer rules coming out of other jurisdictions. And so, yeah, if I was an entrepreneur starting today, I absolutely would look to that. Even the fact that you saw FTX as a non-US entity, like bad things happened. Let's lean into having clarity for the United States. Let's not do what Gensler was doing of regulation through enforcement and bringing lawsuits and lawsuits and lawsuits. Why we wouldn't want this industry to have the benefit, meaning the regulatory clarity, the regulatory oversight, and the benefit of having a Fed master account, that's a good thing. Like, I don't know why we would fight that.
I think that might be a great spot to leave it at. I see we're at time. So Brad Garlinghouse from Ripple, thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, Johnny Krypto, Brad Garlinghouse talked about all the important things that the XRP community is looking for in that very brief interview during DC Fintech Week. He discussed the XRP ledger, the RLUSD stablecoin, meeting with private banks behind the scenes. He also discussed how there's been a major change in the way that regular companies are interacting with digital assets, and specifically the XRP ledger. After the resolution of the SEC lawsuit, he said for the first time ever, big companies were back in action and open for business when it came to meeting with Ripple CEO Brad Garlinghouse and figuring out, hey, how can we use the RLUSD stablecoin? How can we leverage the XRP ledger? But remember this, guys. We are on the precipice of what I believe to be something historic. And we started off today's episode showing you the correlation between the 2017 bull market and what we are currently going through today in 2025. If this correlation proves correct, you must create a profit plan for yourself. We are at an inflection point that we've been waiting for the better half of a decade. And we've showed these correlations time and time again, whether it was the Tesla chart or the Amazon chart, projects that created new all-time highs, traded down and sideways for nearly a decade, and finally broke out, becoming some of the most successful companies in the history of America. That is not hyperbole. That is not an exaggerated analysis. That is the absolute truth. And my anticipation, we are going to see the same thing here for some of our favorite blockchain products, and the XRP ledger looks primed for another move up and to the right. So I'd encourage everybody, before this occurs, take advantage of the products that we offer. Click on the link below and sign up for Merlin today. You can get access to this application 30 days completely free. And I think the most important thing about Merlin is that you can really get a realistic perception of how high your portfolio can go during the digital asset bull run we're all going to experience together. But what's your 2025 peak price prediction for XRP? Leave a comment under the video, and we'll see you all in the next one.